Ladies and gentlemen, our first session of the day is titled Preserving Peace and Stability in the Post-Pandemic Maritime Commons and is moderated by Professor Ralph Emmers, Dean of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS. This session will also be co-moderated by Colonel Kong Yu Yen, Head Naval Intelligence, Republic of Singapore Navy. The speakers for this panel are Vice Admiral Wang Houbin, Deputy Commander, Chinese PLA Navy; Vice Admiral K. Hakim Schönbach, Chief of Navy, German Navy; Vice Admiral Nick Hine, Second Sea Lord, Royal Navy; Chief of the Naval Staff, Indian Navy. Vice Admiral Wang will be joining us virtually, while Vice Admiral Schönbach and Vice Admiral Hine will be speaking live from Singapore. Unfortunately, Admiral Karambir Singh is not able to join us today, and his pre-recorded speech will be featured instead. This is the first time a hybrid modality is featured for IMSC, allowing panelists to join us from different places and time zones. Without further ado, we will now invite Professor Emmers to begin the first session. Professor Emmers, please.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for the first session of the International Maritime Security Conference 2021. Please allow me to briefly introduce 5 very distinguished speakers with us today. Our first speaker will be Vice Admiral, Commander of the Chinese PLA Navy. His previous assignments included service as the Chief of Staff of the South Sea Fleet and Deputy Chief of Staff of the Chinese PLA Navy, and as Deputy Chief of Staff of the East Sea Fleet. Our second speaker will be Vice Admiral K. Achim Schaubach, Chief of Navy of the German Navy. Prior to assuming his current appointment, he served as Deputy Director for Strategy and Operations at the Federal Ministry of Defense in Berlin. Vice Admiral Schönbach previously also commanded the Naval Academy in Flensburg and the Standing NATO Maritime Group 2. Our third speaker will be Vice Admiral Nick Hine, Second Sea Lord of the Royal Navy. Sea Lord is responsible for overseeing all personnel matters, as well as bases and facilities. A submariner by training, Vice Admiral Hine has served operational tours in Northern Ireland, Kosovo, and Iraq, and held senior appointments as Assistant Chief of Naval Staff Policy and as Defense Policy Advisor to the Chancellor in Her Majesty's Treasury. Our fourth speaker will be Admiral Karambir Singh, Chief of the Naval Staff of the Indian Navy. Prior to his appointment as Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Singh served as Flag Officer, Commanding-in-Chief of the Eastern Naval Command. Strong navies play essential roles in preserving the peace and stability of our region. Their strength in conflict, and they deliver direct action to counter non-state threats. They also come together to create the proactive and positive security communities that maintain the good order necessary for all to safely use the maritime commons. So without any further ado, let me invite our first speaker, Vice Admiral Wang, to deliver his remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
好的，谢谢。尊敬的新加坡海军司令孟亚成将军，尊敬的主持人艾默生教授，各位同行，女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家上午好！很高兴出席第7届国际 同大家以这种特殊的方式在云端相聚。首先，我代表中国人民解放军海军对会议成功召开表示热烈祝贺，向出席会议的线上线下的所有嘉宾致以诚挚的问候，向承办会议的新加坡海军同行表示衷心感谢。希望通过今天的会议，与大家进一步增进了解，凝聚共识，深化合作，发展友谊。下面，我以秉持海洋命运共同体理念，携手维护海洋和平与稳定为题进行发言，与大家分享我的观点。一、构建海洋命运共同体的时代伟力。2019年4月23日，中国国家主席习近平在出席中国人民解放军海军成立70周年多国海军活动时，首次提出构建海洋命运共同体重要理念，为维护海上安全稳定，推进全球海洋治理，建设和平与繁荣的海洋，提供了中国智慧和中国方案，充分彰显了中国将自身海洋事业与世界海洋发展相统一的胸怀和担当。在随后举行的构建海洋命运共同体高层研讨会上，中国海军沈金龙司令员、秦生祥政委同与会嘉宾分享了对这的理解和感悟，各位同行也围绕于此进行了研讨交流，提出了很多真知灼见，达成了诸多重要共识。海洋是各国友好往来的便利通道，是世界可持续发展的重要空间，是人类文明进步的共同家园。千百年来，海洋既为人类增添福祉，也带来了诸多的共同挑战。特别是突如其来的新冠肺炎疫情，给世界经济、社会政治进程和整个国际关系体系都带来深远影响。海上安全面临的不稳定性、不确定性更加上升。海上通道安全、海洋自然灾害、海洋环境污染、海上跨国犯罪、海上突发公共安全事件等问题愈发严峻。人们比以往任何时候都更加直接而深刻地认识到同呼吸、共命运、心连心的必要性和紧迫性。我更加深刻地体会到海洋命运共同体理念立意高远，思想深邃，在时代的发展变化中更加凸显出重要指导意义和实践价值。构建海洋命运共同体是习近平主席人类命运共同体重要思想在海洋领域的集中体现和生动传承，蕴含着共建和平、安全、繁荣、开放、美丽海洋的丰富内涵，可以概括为5共，也就是共护海洋和平、共谋海洋安全、共促海洋繁荣、共建海洋环境、共兴海洋文化。在政治上，尊重彼此核心利益，通过对话协商解决分歧矛盾，共同维护海洋和平稳定。在安全上，摒弃零和博弈思维，培树共同 综合、合作、可持续的新型海上安全观，以合作谋安全，以发展促安全。在经济上，发展蓝色伙伴关系，推动海上互联互通，共同促进海洋经济发展。在文化上，承认多样性和差异性，求同存异，聚同化异，共同培育开放包容、风雨同舟、探索创新的海洋文化。在环境上，保护海洋生态和海洋生物多样性，强化海洋环境污染防治，让海洋成为人类可以永远依赖的美好家园。第二，中国海军积极践行构建海洋命运共同体重要理念。海军是构建海洋命运共同体的重要力量，在维护海洋和平安全和繁荣发展中发挥着关键作用。近年来，中国海军积极履行大国责任义务，推动海上安全合作，努力为构建海洋命运共同体贡献力量，坚定维护和平安全。中国始终高举和平、发展、合作、共赢旗帜，坚持走和平发展道路。中华民族的血液中没有侵略他人、称王称霸的基因。中国人民从来没有欺负、压迫、奴役过其他国家人民，过去没有，现在没有，将来也不会有。100年来，中国共产党团结带领中国人民，开辟了一条符合中国国情，并得到人民普遍拥护的发展道路。在中国共产党的领导下，中国海军始终秉持海洋命运共同体理念，积极做世界和平的建设者、全球发展的贡献者和国际秩序的维护者。依据联合国安理会有关决议，中国海军先后派出38批128艘次舰艇赴亚丁湾、索马里海域实施常态化护航行动，为途经的中外船舶提供安全保护。同时，推广亚丁湾护航国际合作的成功经验，丰富联合行动的方式方法，与各国护航力量共同维护海上航运安全。同舟共济，团结合作。当前，新冠肺炎疫情肆虐全球，全球公共卫生面临严重威胁。中国始终站在与一切病毒斗争的最前沿，站在国际抗疫合作的第一线。中国一向发展中国家提供了5亿多剂疫苗，向150多个国家提供了紧急医疗物资援助。未来3年内，还将再提供30亿美元的国际援助，用于支持发展中国家抗疫和恢复社海军为在华军事留学生进行防疫指导和心理辅导，无偿提供防疫物资和核酸检测，在自愿基础上免费为留学生接种新冠肺炎疫苗。对因疫情未能及时返校的留学生，提供远程在线教学。受疫情影响，中国海军与各国海军面对面交流合作虽然有所减少， 但是我们充分利用电话、邮件、视频等手段，继续保持了沟通，并且与新加坡、印尼、巴基斯坦、俄罗斯等国海军进行了双边或多边海上联合军演，进一步增强了理解和信任。海上公共安全产品，中国海军持续在开展国际海上救援、提供人道主义医疗服务、分享海洋信息数据等方面作出贡献。近年来，先后派遣舰机参与了马航失联航班搜救、马尔代夫水荒救援、也门各国公民紧急撤离等任务。中国海军和平方舟号医院船先后7次执行和谐使命任务，共为43个到访国家提供医疗服务，惠及民众23万余人次。2019年，中国海军派出医疗人员依托中国人民解放军驻基布提保障基地开展光明行动专项医疗服务活动，为当地白内障患者免费实施康复手术。今年，在得知印尼海军南加号潜艇遇难的消息后，中国海军第一时间派出舰艇编队赴失事海域，与印尼海军精诚合作，实施搜救和打捞救援行动，积极参与国际海盗测量组织等专业领域交流合作，开展海图资料交换，在南海海域提供水文气象信息、灯塔导航等服务，坚持维护规则法治。中国坚定维护以联合国为核心的国际体系，以国际法为基础的国际秩序，坚持通过制度和规则协调规范各国关系，推动国际秩序和国际体系朝着更加公正合理的方向发展。迄今为止，中国加入了几乎所有普遍性政府间国际组织和国际公约，对外缔结了超过2.5万项双边条约。中国海军积极参与了西太平洋海军论坛、印度洋海军论坛、地中海地区海上力量研讨会、高尔对话等地区海上安全机制，与各国海军同行进行了有效沟通。2014年，中国海军举办西太平洋海军论坛年会，成功推动签署了海上意外相遇规则。中国海军始终坚持维护海洋法治，注重加强安全机制建设，倡导平等适用，善意执行相关规则，加强海上行动管控，避免误解误判，共同维护海洋和平稳定。第三，中国海军愿与各国海军共同推动构建海洋命运共同体。当前我们所处的是一个充满挑战的年代，也是一个充满希望的年代。我真诚希望大家都能秉持构建海洋命运共同体理念，采取更加务实的举措，共同推进海上安全合作。为此，我愿意提出以下建议。第一，密切各国海军多层次沟通交流。中国海军愿以真诚积极的态度，加强与各国海军的战略沟通， 健全多层级对话沟通机制，在地区和国际海洋安全事务上协调配合，共担责任，共同应对海上威胁与挑战。特别是青年军官作为海军的未来，他们之间的交流是海军发展友好关系的基础。我们已经为98个国家培训了2610名学员，邀请100余名军官随舰航行。我们欢迎有更多国家的海军学员来华学习，也将继续邀请各国青年海军军官随中国海军训练舰航行训练，让他们在一起磨练意志品质，提升综合技能。第二，加强海上行动领域的协调配合。近年来，各国海军在反海盗、人道主义救援减灾等方面开展了联合行动，卓有成效。从近年来各国潜艇搜救的情况来看，救援时效性要求高，安全风险大，组织实施复杂，仅靠本国力量是远远不够的，急需加强援潜救生领域合作。我们应积极探索建立相关的合作机制，有针对性地开展援潜救生、人道主义救援减灾等科目的联合演练，熟悉国际救援组织流程，不断提升协同行动能力。第三，深化军事医疗领域合作。当前新冠肺炎疫情防控形势依然严峻，中国海军按照国家的统一部署和安排，采取加强防控知识培训、做好舰艇消杀工作等措施，我们积累了一些有益的经验做法。今年下半年，我们继太平洋海军论坛医学研讨会视频会议，我们愿与各国海军分享抗疫经验，深入开展军事领域的合作与交流，欢迎各国海军同行积极参加。各位同行、女士们、先生们、朋友们，古罗马哲人塞涅卡说过，我们是同一片大海的海浪，面向蓝色的世纪，海洋的发展与繁荣前景广阔，海洋的和平与安全更加珍贵。尽管有时会遇到惊涛骇浪、逆流浅滩，但只要我们秉持海洋命运共同体理念，把准航向，齐心协力，必将行稳致远，驶向更加美好的未来。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Admiral, for your presentation. May I now invite Vice Admiral Schaumbach to take the floor.
So, must I do something? Dear Admiral Beng, dear Excellency Admirals, colleagues and gentlemen, I would like, first of all, thank our host, Admiral Alan Beng, for the invitation and his hospitality. And honestly, sir, when I yesterday arrived, I just called my wife and said, I'll never come back. I stay here, enjoy your hospitality and the view of from my suite. I never move out again. So please accept probably you have a job for me here in your Navy. From German perspective, Singapore is an important partner, sharing common values in the Indo-Pacific region, and it's, of course, for us, even a key ally for multilateralism. Singapore, like Germany, is interested in security, stability, and growth. The bilateral cooperation between the armed forces of our two nations is long-lasting and very successful indeed. For example, submarine training for the Singapore crews in Germany, or our just implemented liaison officer at the Information Fusion Center, IFC, are highlights of our Navy's fruitful cooperation, which we would be glad to extend in the future. It is a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak about the challenges of the maintaining peace in our maritime commons, especially from the perspective of the German Navy. And I was asked to elaborate a bit on the recent decisions in Parliament, what leads to a new redirecting effort into the Pacific and concentrating a bit on our next steps. So let me start by looking just in the recent past. Most important conclusions drawn latest with the annexation of the Crimea Peninsula and the invasion of into eastern Ukraine by Russia in 2014, it's a necessity to redefine the balance of national and collective defense and crisis management. And ladies and gentlemen, believe me, it was a hard endeavor in Germany even to have this discussion in Parliament. National defense and international crisis management have to be treated again as equally important as tasks. This is nothing less than, especially for Germany, a paradigm shift from us, both in terms of mindset, training, necessity, and in future procurement. And I hope it goes on even after the federal election we have on the 26th of September this year. Therefore, German armed forces are at the moment in a transitional phase. Last month, our ministry issued a paper with the key points for the future planning. German government has also clearly acknowledged the great importance of the German Navy by approving all planned projects despite the budgetary restrictions imposed by Corona. And so did the Parliament. Believe me, gentlemen, it was an unexpected decision by the members of Parliament, and my colleagues from Army and Air Force are still speechless. In the coming years, we will get new frigates, destroyers, corvettes, submarines, maritime patrol aircraft, tankers, helicopters, missile systems, and so on, and carry out extensive modernization of the existing units. It's really a shift. Currently, we cannot complain about the lack of tasks, and we are not in the position to build up operational reserves in the near future, yet. This is due to the current extensive modernization of the German Navy and frequent delays in shipyard projects. The German Navy is now engaged at the moment in 6 deployments. Of course, NATO standing naval forces, although I want to change this slightly. NATO activity in the Aegean Sea, UNIFIL off the coast of Lebanon, Atalanta, Irene, and of course, Sea Guardian. Germany is right now intending to intensify its security and defense engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, along with our partners. The German government established policy guidelines for the Indo-Pacific in September last year. To underline, let me quote our Minister of Defense, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer: "The world's political and economic center of gravity is shifting from the transatlantic to the Indo-Pacific region. This is where the future international order will be shaped," unquote. We are talking about common interests and values. The German government is strongly committed to the multilateral and value-based order in the world. In this world, it is not the law of the strongest. The Bundeswehr, the Federal Armed Forces, support these strategic goals on the German government in accordance with the chapter Peace, Stability and Security, in particular with maritime presence in the region, as well as more intensive cooperation, joint exercises and training with partner forces. For that reason, I'm glad, and most of you know already, to announce the commitment of the German Navy deploying FGS Bayern, or Bavaria, to the Indo-Pacific region, beginning in August with several visits to nations in the region and, of course, with exercise with partners. Germany's commitment to the region, including the deployment of a frigate, is recognized by our valued partners and is a sign of integration and preservation of peace and stability. There are many visits with our valued partners to improve our partnership. There's also, make this clear, a visit to China, as asked for. It's a clear signal of willingness to continue the dialogue with China. Partner, of course, key partner jointly addressing global challenges and of course also the reaction of Chinese ships at the Kieler Woche, or Kiel Week. We had been already present to the Indian Ocean in the last 2 decades with the participation of OEF and Atalanta, even it's just the western part. But this is the first deployment of a German warship for 19 years to the Pacific area. For the future, I intend to enable a German maritime deployment on a regular basis. Now we, just as said, started with a frigate, but hopefully even more ships in the future. Together with the new frigates class 125, which can remain in the area of operations for up to 2 years and exchange crews on the spot, one could go even further. It might be even worth considering a German Navy permanent or temporary logistic hub for crew changes and repairs here in the area, might be Singapore or Australia. My fellow colleagues and admirals, we will inform you the key data of the deployment, and I would be pleased if further opportunities of cooperation at sea would arise in addition to the beside the port visits. German Indo-Pac engagement in terms of security policy is not limited to the maritime domain. For example, coming into the end, in late summer 22, next year, German Air Force Eurofighters and air refueling assets will take part in Australian pitch black exercise to train Royal Australian Air Forces and other nations. German liaison officer, I mentioned already, was sent to Singapore to the Information Fusion Center, and Singapore's procurement Leopard 2 R4 tanks and other German-made military equipment. And by the way, Admiral Beng, I would probably the next time to the restrictions of COVID, it's impossible to see how you store these Leopard 2 in like hotel-wise. I heard this, I have seen some pictures, I love that. Well, probably we'll get the same. So, to the end, thank you for listening. Forward to a lively discussion and inspiring side talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Admiral. May I now invite Vice Admiral Nick Hine, who I believe is in the room, to deliver his remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Admiral Beng, Heads of Navy, distinguished guests, good morning. Could I just firstly add my thanks to that of everybody else for hosting this astonishing event. The amount of logistics that's gone into getting us here and indeed hosting those people virtually, I think, is a tantamount to your success. So well done. It truly is a pleasure to be here. I haven't been getting out very much lately. For generations, the world's oceans have enabled seafaring nations to communicate, trade, prosper, and assure their sovereign security, either as a natural defense to existential threats or as trading networks. More recently, the sea and the access it affords has catalyzed globalization and galvanized a flourishing import and export market, underpinning economies and driving global prosperity. Despite the development of air travel, it is the sea upon which our economies and way of life rely. International rules have been developed to formalize the use of the maritime environment, and we all recognize the imperative of having an international rules-based order, UNCLOS, to govern the tens of thousands of ships that crisscross the world daily. The criticality of upholding and protecting maritime law and norms is difficult to overstate. So global security requires maritime security, and never has it been more important. But there are issues that are not just about the transport of goods. The security of the maritime commons is no longer restricted to the security of our lines of communication on the seas, but also increasingly of our lines of communication between continents, connects individuals and organizations, and powers our ever-growing dependence on e-commerce and virtual trading blocks. If the first era of globalization was powered through the use of the sea, the second era is surely reliant upon maintaining security of these critical connections. Add to this fishing, migration, resource competition, and our oceans are an increasingly congested environment challenged by state and non-state actors seeking to influence and shape for their advantage and often others' disadvantage, without recourse to wider international governance and contrary to the international rules-based order. What is happening in our seas is just one part of a wider threat to global peace and stability, and it is an area which our adversaries are adapting. We must adapt to, even with the spectre of COVID still present. So COVID-19 has shown how a global pandemic can impact on nations and how pre-existing social and political fractures can be exploited. The resources required to fight COVID have strained the budgets of every nation and have required all of us to re-examine how we view all aspects of our security. Security in the maritime environment has not escaped scrutiny, nor should it. In fact, perhaps it is a question of now more than ever, as we weigh the impact of COVID on what it means for delivering maritime and therefore global security, and how we rise to meet this challenge as professional mariners. The Indo-Pacific environment is no exception, with the challenges of COVID supplemented by increased hybrid threats, whether they be piracy, terrorism, narcotics, arms smuggling, people trafficking, and illegal fishing. This region has seen a 200% increase in the number of piracy and armed robbery incidents from January to June 2020 compared to the previous 12 months. In Europe, we have challenges. In both the Mediterranean and the English Channel, migrant flows remain a significant problem that cannot be resolved by any single nation alone. However, it is not just non-state actors who seek to capitalise on perceptions of a reduced focus on security, with some states being persistent in their approaches to expand and shape their regional influence at the expense of others. Most of us face similar challenges as we examine our responsibilities to contribute to preserving security and stability in our regions, and indeed globally. But as navies, we are feeling the impact of the pandemic keenly across our fleets and in our ships. We all know that warships and submarines are not designed for social distancing. They are the epitome of function over form, and so any illness is often hard to contain. But we have seen that it can be managed. Witness the fantastic images of ships from the UK, Malaysia, Thailand and Singapore exercising together during the last week, demonstrating that our collective ability to deliver maritime security is alive and well, and perhaps rather disproving some of the more shrill media claims that our ships are ineffective and our ability to operate through COVID has been paralysed. There are no simple answers, of course. We must be diligent in protecting the men and women who serve aboard our ships, and sharing experiences between partners and allies will be critical in maintaining maritime operations. This extends well beyond our ships at sea and must be a comprehensive approach that enables our ports to operate, shipping administrators to function, and supply chains to keep vital logistics moving. Our industrial partners have had to overcome raw material shortages, lead time issues, reduced working hours, labour shortages and transport constraints. The entire mechanism that underpins maritime security has been required to cooperate as never before and to innovate and overcome this generational challenge. Against this backdrop, the Royal Navy has had to dig deep, as epitomised by the current Carrier Strike Group deployment, and ensuring that our contribution to the UK's Indo-Pacific tilt has substance and meaning. The longer-term impacts of COVID remain unclear. I think many lessons from the pandemic will endure. While remaining a challenge, they are likely to be overcome through a number of factors: vaccinations, health protocols, excellent medical facilities and diagnostics, but not least continued collaboration over our experiences and the exemplary service that our sailors show every day. Perversely, perhaps, COVID has actually forced a pace of change that was really needed. Modernised working practices, increased digitised activity, and increased our operational resilience, to name but three. Indeed, speaking in Hanoi gave a very clear indication of how he sees the UK role living with COVID. As we continue to grapple with the pandemic, the challenges and the opportunities that the world will face, and this region in particular faces, are becoming ever more complex. It's clear that partnerships are ever more important. The UK offers genuine partnership. We are investing in our defence network and reaching out to partners through a comprehensive programme of engagements and exchanges, shared training, exercising, and partnered deployments. It is this theme of partnerships and collaboration that should give us all a sense of optimism against what continues to be an extremely challenging period. Over the coming weeks, as the carrier strike group continues east, I think everyone will continue to see the UK's commitment made real in the Indo-Pacific region. This commitment is further exemplified by the deployment of 2 offshore patrol vessels that will be permanently based in the region from later this summer, with HMS Spey and HMS Tamar and their crews eagerly working alongside and learning from many of the navies represented here today. But it is probably also worth remembering some of the challenges that exist beyond COVID. The threat that climate change poses to humankind, the pressures that democratic values face, human rights, the rule of law, freedom of speech, all will impact on us going forward, and we must be ready, and in this we are always better together. It was also notable to me that the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, spoke here yesterday. He did not shy away from highlighting the regional and indeed global challenges. But in addressing these themes, he returned constantly to the importance of alliances and partnerships, friendships and teamwork. So in conclusion, and as we all continue to grapple with COVID, but look to a time when globally and as individual nations it is behind us, we must ensure we play our part in building back better from the pandemic. We must state and state actors will always press for advantage where they perceive a reduction in our capability, and we will need to meet the challenge they offer. But we will meet these challenges through the changes that COVID has catalysed in driving forward change in our navies, becoming more resilient, becoming more efficient, harnessing technology and becoming more outward focused. As the UK now brings substance to its Indo-Pacific tilt, the Royal Navy hopes to play a major role with a credible and reliable regional presence over the decades to come. But it is through partnerships and alliances, through friendship and teamwork, we will all be collectively well placed to meet the full, multifaceted and complex challenges that the maritime environment offers. And while not naive about the scale and complexity of these challenges, we should be confident that our collective enterprise, our varied perspectives and our determination to succeed will demonstrate that we have weathered the COVID storm and are able to preserve and advance peace and stability going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Admiral Hein. We now have Admiral Singh. As mentioned previously, he could unfortunately not be with us today, but he has pre-recorded a statement which we will now all view and listen to. So if we could launch that video, thank you.
Greetings to all participants of the 7th International Maritime Security Conference. At the outset, my compliments to the Republic of Singapore Navy for their efforts in conducting this edition of the seminar in a hybrid, which is physical cum online format. I am happy for this opportunity to share a few thoughts on securing our maritime commons in a post-pandemic world. The COVID pandemic has been perhaps the most significant black swan event of our lifetimes and will play a definitive role in shaping the future. It led to unimaginable loss of life and tremendous stress on global and national economies. India recently weathered a severe second wave, which exacted a heavy toll in terms of human, social, and economic cost. And with no clear end in sight to the pandemic, nations continue to adjust to the new normal imposed by the pandemic. This is equally true for the maritime commons. And while the pandemic imposes stresses on security forces, the threats in the maritime commons are unlikely to accord similar respect to the disease or recede because of COVID. But despite these challenges, COVID has also proved to be a unifier in many ways. It does not draw a distinction between nationality, race, economic status, or gender. It affects all. And this has brought about a realization that we need to work together to combat the pandemic. And this common understanding affords opportunities for greater cooperation, which can be harnessed towards promoting peace and security in the maritime commons. India's outlook in this regard is guided by our Honorable Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, which means the seas in Sanskrit, and is an acronym for security and growth for all in the region. And this drives our policies of Act East and Neighborhood First. The increased significance of the Indo-Pacific to the world is a key driver of these policies. Juxtaposing the challenges posed by COVID on the complex tapestry of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, I would like to say that India views the Indo-Pacific as a natural region where the destinies of nations are closely interlinked. The vast geography, organic resources, extensive accentuate the necessity of maintaining peace and security in the region towards prosperity for all. Several of the maritime threats in the region are transnational in character. For instance, terrorism, piracy, illegal fishing, gun and drug running, human trafficking, etc. These affect all nations and need to be countered in a cooperative, collaborative, and collective manner. We in the Indian Navy approach Indo-Pacific, therefore, as a working principle. Now, against this backdrop, I am convinced that significant convergences exist amongst nations. I feel that three issues bear even greater relevance in a post-pandemic world. Those are interoperability, engagements, which finally lead to secure seas. Why interoperability? Our engagements need to be based on a clear understanding of all friends as equal partners. Security threats on the seas affect all nations. In addressing these threats, there is an increasing recognition of the fact that no one can do it alone. And towards this, the aim should be to develop collective maritime competence so that we can face the challenges collectively rather than individually. We all have already been doing this through frequent bilateral, multilateral exercises and PASEXs, developing common SOPs for areas of mutual interest, regular coordinated patrols or COPATs, subject matter exchanges on operational issues, and all these are being done as part of interoperability. This interoperability has to be supported by engagements, and here I feel we collectively need to be more ambitious in what we can achieve together. In doing our bit, the Indian Navy has progressed a few initiatives. The first is which has made strides in promoting collaborative engagements in the Indian Ocean region, despite just being over a decade old. Bridging of regional integration gaps through its various working groups is a key priority for IONS. The Goa Maritime Conclave, or the GMC, is aimed at constructive dialogue amongst the neighborhood navies so as to focus on outcomes in smaller groups. The first conclave was held in November 2017, and the next edition is scheduled in Goa in November this year. And of course, Milan, which aims to encourage operational level engagements between practitioners and ship teams so that we can learn from each other. The next edition is planned in February 2022 with the theme Camaraderie, Cohesion, Collaboration. And I invite all of you present here to visit the city of Vizag for the next edition of Milan in 2022. And the final that is enabled by interoperability and engagements, to my mind, is secure seas. And this will always require constant effort. The foundational drivers for secure seas include a common shared understanding that the seas are critical for peace and stability, convergence of the visions of peace, prosperity, inclusiveness, open seas, etc., and respect for each other's security concerns. So as we continue to battle COVID, in this stage, we must aim to conduct more exercises in non-contact format and focus on operational interactions at sea. We must leverage technology and identify secure communication means to drive operational exchanges. We must enhance virtual interactions between leaders and virtual training exchanges to surge trust between navies. Of course, there is no substitute for face-to-face interactions, and therefore once the pandemic recedes, virtual interactions with increased physical exchanges supplemented with virtual exchanges, so that trust and interoperability developed in this challenging period is further strengthened. So in conclusion, I strongly believe that challenges are opportunities spelt differently. And while no one can predict the end of COVID, I am most confident that the only means of ensuring peace and security in the maritime commons is through a cooperative approach based on mutual respect. Just as the change of the Olympics motto has added together to faster, higher, stronger, which makes it faster, higher, stronger together, our collective efforts must hyphenate together to each of our endeavors. Finally, I wish all of you the very best and wish the conference all success. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will send our thanks to Admiral Singh for his intervention. I would like to thank all of the speakers for your very thoughtful remarks. I very much appreciate how the comments collectively reinforce the importance of the maritime commons, and each of the navies represented here today clearly have a role to play in preserving the peace and stability of those waters. So this brings us now to the Q&A part of this first panel. You have different options to ask your questions. You can do so through the drop box. You can, of course, also do so directly in the room. And I will, at a slightly later stage, go directly to my co-moderator, Colonel Kong, who may be able to pick some questions directly in the room. But to get the ball rolling, I'm happy to say that we already have some questions on the Dropbox. You may not, gentlemen, be able to read them from where you sit, so I will summarize some of the questions. A question which asks on the balance that needs to be found between managing domestic health priorities and maritime security. To what extent is this a challenge, and to what extent does maritime security continue to be a priority in your respective countries? Direct questions to individual speakers, one coming from Ewan Graham from IISS Asia, asking what would be the main activities that the German Navy be looking forward to with partners in their planned deployment to the Indo-Pacific. Likewise, I have a direct question to Vice Admiral Hein. Could you elaborate on the roles and rationale for the 2 patrol boats to be formed, and how a more regular Royal Navy presence will interact with regional navies, including the USN? So here are some open questions as well as direct questions. What I suggest I do is perhaps go first to our last speaker, who is present in the room, Vice Admiral Hein, to see whether he would like to answer the open-ended as well as the focused question directly addressed to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether you can actually hear me. I think you can. I don't need to press any buttons. So thank you very much indeed. If I try the open-ended one first and then the more specific. So clearly the balance between domestic health and maritime security is a challenging one that we all face. And we have to work collaboratively that impacts on both the individual nations, the wider region, and indeed the globe. So, as I sort of said in my remarks, a combination of vaccinations, a combination of shared practice, understanding, knowledge, and data, I think is the way to get after this. We are not going to solve all of this in a matter of weeks. And if it had been easy to do so, of course, we'd have done so by now. So I think the answer is to continue down the road that we have already plotted, whilst trying to accelerate where we can, I was conscious of the Defence Minister's view this morning of the number of seafarers who have been stuck on board platforms for a year or more, and we have the same problem in Europe as here. And it's a very challenging issue to deal with. But I come back to be shared. This is a global problem, and therefore it's a global response and a global solution that needs to be applied. On the specific roles and rationale for offshore patrol vessels being deployed, we've had an episodic relationship with the region for far too long, and this forms part of us returning to where we've always been historically. In terms of what the platforms will do, they're here to do a myriad of things, from supporting the Five Powers Defence Agreement to interacting with regional navies, allies and partners, defence engagement, training, the opportunity to do things in the region that we haven't done for a period of time. And the one criticism I think that people always throw at navies that are regionally dispersed is that without being persistent, actually being helpful. So this is part of us trying to be more persistent, albeit in a small way. And if that works for both us and the region, then we would hope to improve on that in terms of volume and scale over time. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Vice Admiral Wang, would you care to answer the broader question of finding the balance between domestic health priorities on the one hand and the need to continue to focus on maritime security as a priority?
谢谢主持人先生。我理解你的问题是想就当前这个新冠肺炎这种蔓延的态势之下，中国如何应对疫情，以及中国海军如何在疫情应对的大背景之下组织相关工作的问题。我不知道我的理解正确还是不正确。
Thank you, moderator. First, I want to make sure that whether I have the clear understanding of this general question is that when the COVID-19 is raging around the world, how does China as a country to fight against the COVID-19? And at the same time, how does the PLA, the Chinese PLA Navy, is coping with this COVID-19 as well as organizing all the work for the Navy? Is that the question, the balance between the two aspects?
Absolutely. If you would like to address that question, that would be very kind. Thank you.
是的，完全正确。如果您能够简短回应这个问题的话，我会非常感谢。
我注意到了，各位海军同仁，对当前的疫情防控工作都比较关注。
Actually, I noted that all the naval colleagues pay attention to the prevention and control of the COVID-19.
我觉得这也是我们这次会议一个重要的议题，在当前疫情这个大的态势之下，如何进一步加强合作，促进和平，对这个问题进行探讨非常有意义。
And also, I think it's a part of this topic of our conference. And I also think it is very meaningful for us to discuss on how to strengthen cooperation as well as addressing the COVID-19 challenges.
新冠肺炎疫情爆发1年多来，对世界人民的安全和健康，以及经济活动影响，同样对中国也不例外。
Over the past more than 1 year since the outbreak of the COVID-19, I think it has severe impact to the health and also security and economy of the world. And also China is not an exception.
我在这里想简要的介绍一下中国的防疫情况，因为时间关系无法展开。去年疫情爆发以来，在中国政府和中国共产党领导之下，中国全体中国人民万众一心，这个在抗疫上面取得了巨大成就。
Since the limited time, I just want to respond briefly. I think that since the outbreak of the COVID-19 under the leadership of the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China, we all collected concerted efforts, I mean, all through the country, China, to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have achieved important results.
我可以告诉各位的是，到目前为止，中国对疫情的控制，目前每天的发病率已经控制在了个位数，多的时候也就是在2位数之内。
I may say that currently, because of the control efforts, prevention and control efforts against this COVID-19 in China, the daily cases has now tipped into the single digit or not as more as the double digits.
截止到昨天为止，中国新冠肺炎疫苗注射的这个总剂数已经接近16亿剂次。
And actually, as of yesterday, the vaccines we have just provided for China has almost nearly to 1.6 billion.
中国政府有决心到今年年底，对全体国民按照应种接种的要求，完成疫苗接种任务。
And the Chinese government is determined to complete the vaccination efforts at the end of this year for everyone who is necessary to get vaccinated.
同样，中国海军作为中国这个抵抗这个新冠肺炎疫情的一支重要力量，去年在武汉这个爆发疫情之后，第一时间就派出了医疗救援队，参与了这个疫情的防控工作。
And for the Chinese PLA Navy, at the moment, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 in Wuhan, the PLA Navy plays its role as an important force. And we immediately send a medical team to Wuhan for the prevention and control of the pandemic.
同样，我们海军自身也加强疫情防控工作。到目前为止，海军的舰艇部队、飞行部队，海军人员没有发现新冠疫情感染人员。
And also, the Chinese PLA Navy made great efforts for the prevention and control of pandemic for itself. Until now, no case has been found in our fleet and aviation forces.
同时，中国海军对国外在华学习的这个在中国海军留学以及培训的国外的海军同仁，注意加强疫情的防控和身体保护，取得了很好的成绩。
And also, the Chinese Navy has made great results in the control and prevention of pandemic for those international students studying China.
我想中国抗疫取得的成绩，世界有目共睹，有目共睹。我在此还愿意再次重申，今年下半年中国海军将在上海，召开西太平洋海军论坛的这个医学交流会。我们愿意在这次会议上面与世界各国的海军同行共同分享中国以及中国海军在抗击新冠肺炎疫情方面的一些好的做法以及这个进一步的打算。
And I think that all the achievements made by China has been witnessed by all the world. And here I want to reiterate that in the latter half of this year, we are actually scheduled to hold a WPNS medical seminar in Shanghai. And we will be willing to share our best practice and experience in the prevention and the control of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we would like to invite our naval colleagues to participate. And we will share the experience not only from our national level and also the PLA Navy level.
谢谢主持人。
Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much. Let me now come back to Vice Admiral Schombach on the specific question addressed to you, sir. And I will repeat the question. What would be the main activities that the German Navy be looking for partners in their planned deployment to the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, just let me start on the first question, although Admiral Hein have given already a perfect answer. I think from a Navy perspective, for me, it was the most important that we have really one outbreak of ships, which is one few cases in a single digit. So I could be happy with that. To the specific question, now just to stretch, the ship was leaving on the 2nd of August this year and will reach the Indo-Pacific region around about beginning mid-September. From the administrative side, it's seen as a platform, of course, also for talks. But I was using when I go probably to India, of course, to Japan, as I was invited, and other countries. But with the focus on exercises and training, it is, of course, more than comp checks. What we want to do is, in the framework of PASIX, so passing exercises, is ASW, SUW, AAW, as all these tactical, but also long-range CIFAS missile trainings with all the partners who give the opportunity. And if possible, we meet our allies and friends in the region to get integrated, maybe in task groups or carrier strike groups, and where possible. So this is the idea. And then, of course, along that, all these port visits I mentioned during my intro, and so we'll be back in February, March next year. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to take.
Thank you, sir. Let me now start the second round of questions. I have a broad question coming from Ambassador Ong Keng-yong, asking all of the panelists, and here I quote, given the blue nature of naval activities and operational purview, how can the navies represented on this panel cooperate more concretely on climate action to mitigate impact of environmental degradation in the oceans? Then I do have a specific question for Vice Admiral Wang, and here I quote, what does the PLA perceive as the most pressing threat at sea? I would also like to pass on the floor to my on-site co-moderator, Colonel Kong, to see whether he may have anyone in the audience wanting to ask a question directly by standing up. So, Colonel Kong, over to you. Do you have anyone on site?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Are there any questions from the floor? If you do, please raise your hand and a mic will be passed to you. Prof, we're good here for the moment.
Okay, I will let everyone in the room a few more minutes to come up with interesting questions. So why don't we start with those two? The broad one on climate change, and then specifically a question for Vice Admiral Wang on the nature of the most pressing threat at sea. So may I again invite Vice Admiral Hein to start on the climate change?
Thank you very much on climate change. The most pressing problem that we probably face, I think that's recognized by everybody in the room in terms of global activity. An enormous challenge, one in which navies must play their part. But I think it's really interesting that the UK is holding COP26 in Glasgow later in the year, where we'll see a reinvigoration, I think, of climate activity. So as part of that, we in the Royal Navy are looking at how in our new ship procurement policies we are going to go green or greener, and therefore we need to think about how technology can help us. There's a whole bunch of high-end, leading-edge technologies in hydrogen power, battery technology, etc., that we will need to be aware of, but it's probably a bit leading edge to be what we would consider mainstream military effective just now, and therefore we probably need to be early followers rather than early adopters of some of this technology, and we need to follow the civilian world quite closely but quite quickly in how they adapt in the maritime domain to this particular challenge. But I think the most important thing to recognise here is that people are polluters, not platforms. And that therefore leads us to the whole piece of education. Without educating all of our people, our sailors, our industry, our civilian populations, we won't make a big difference. So if I could sort of leave the question with that I think actually the conversation needs to be moved on to how we educate our people in order to determine that just doing very small things at tactical level can aggregate to strategic effect and therefore reduce our carbon impact at a much higher level.
Thank you. Admiral Schombach, may I come to you on the climate change questions? Do navies have a role to play, and what role could this be?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Maybe ask someone else. No, honestly, as Admiral Hines said, since the Second World War in Germany, we have by the civil society and on military and all aspects. And with regard to climate change, it's more or less the same. The Parliament was passing an act, I think it's a couple of weeks, or probably months ago, that the Bundeswehr, the whole of our armed forces, have to be zero emission until 2030. So we have just 8 years left. But especially in regard to the Navy, yes, as Admiral Hines said, we're talking about procurement, just having ships with with hybrid propulsion or just full electric, and instead of in the future in self-defense, which instead of firing rounds, we're talking about now concentrating on laser technology. So there are several fields, but honestly, from my point of view, now sitting here, the act to have a zero emissions Bundeswehr or Federal Armed Forces or Navy within the next 8 or 10 years, I think this is an illusion. We have to do more, yes. We have to, as Admiral Hines said, to teach and educate our young people on that. But it comes from their side as well. But I think it's a hard way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now go back to Vice Admiral Wang. If I may invite you to either address or both the broad question of climate change, and then just to repeat the specific question asked to you, sir, what does the PLA perceive as the most pressing threat at sea? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, moderator.
作为海军的一员，我想这个中国海军也好，世界各国海军同行也好，对于海上这个最大的，我想还是主要像大家刚才讨论的更加关切的，应该还是来自于自然灾害的一些，你比如像台风啊，不可抗力的一些自然灾害对海军造成的影响。
I think as a member of the Navy, both the Chinese PLA Navy as well as the foreign navies around the world, I think the most pressing threat in the maritime domains for navies is from the natural disasters such as typhoon and then those irresistible forces.
保护海洋环境，应对气候变化，是世界各国 人民，也是各国海军共同的责任和义务。
Preserving maritime environment as well as coping with the climate change is a shared responsibility of all navies around the world.
中国政府已经向全世界坚定承诺，到2030年，中国将达到这个碳排放达标，这个峰值，2050年将达到这个碳中和。
And also, the Chinese government has resolutely announced that by 2030, the carbon emission will be halved, and by 2050, it will be zero.
碳中和。
By 2050.
我想中国海军会积极响应中国政府的号召，在应对海洋这个环境变化和这个保护这个海洋环境方面，做出中国海军应有的贡献。
And I think the Chinese PLA Navy will actively respond to the call from the Chinese government, and we will try hard to preserving maritime environment in the future.
在海洋实践当中，我想主要有下面以下几点。我们这个从海洋保护的角度、海洋环境保护的角度来讲，我们加以了注重予以控制。一是作为海军的训练区，我们选择训练区上始终坚持避开海洋生态环境保护区。
And I think I can share with you when we take a look back to our historic practices in preserving a marine environment. That is, the number one is that in the choosing of the training areas, the Chinese PLA Navy tried hard to avoid those biological preservation areas.
第二是中国海军这个坚决反对舰艇油污的直排、达标排放以及回港排放。
So, the Chinese PLA Navy resolutely opposed direct disposal and the standard proposal, and also the disposal reverse to ports.
第三是中国海军积极向这个国际社会提供这个海洋气象以及公共这个海洋预报环境的服务。
And the third one is that the Chinese PLA Navy actively providing international meteorological and the common public commons services to the world.
我们也愿意与世界各国海军同行一起，就海洋环境保护以及应对这个气候变化等问题，进行这个更加深入和积极的探讨，在不同的平台以及不同的场合来分享各国海军这方面有益的经验。
And also, the Chinese PLA Navy is waiting to work together with the world navies to share experiences and ideas in preserving and protecting the maritime environment, as well as climate change. And we would like to have even deeper and greater interactions in different platforms and at different occasions for exchange of experiences.
好，谢谢。
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try now to have a final round of questions. Colonel Kong, any takers from the audience?
Prof?
Not to worry, I do have more questions in the chat room, unless there are people in the audience.
Yeah, Professor, we are good here.
Okay, all right. So in that case, I will ask a broad question, perhaps to our European counterparts. And then I have two specific questions for Vice Admiral Wang coming from the chat room. So my broad question is actually coming from me, and it's about the sailors who are very much at the heart of every Navy. So how has the pandemic impacted the recruitment, training, and retention of your sailors? What will be the mid and long-term implications of those dynamics? Has COVID-19 made it harder to recruit, train, and retain sailors? Then two specific questions for Vice Admiral Wang coming from the chat room. The first one is with regards to submarine rescue exercise. The question is China going to initiate its own exercise or join the pre-existing ones? For example, ex-Pacific Reach. So the question related to submarine rescue exercises. The second question is a little bit more conceptual. It asks you, sir, how do you see China's concept of a maritime community coexisting with the rule-based international order? So the questions are available on the chat room. So if I may first go to Admiral Hein and followed by Admiral, why don't we reverse the order? Why don't we start with Admiral Schonbach on your recruitment worries over the last 2 years, and then we will go to your counterpart from the UK.
That's hard because normally you can say, okay, he gave me already a perfect answer. No, yeah, indeed, we were not allowed during the pandemic to test and to recruit. That's so easy, is it? And we had already vacancy, but the fact was really that we have to, in the next years, that's about 500, 400, 500 men and women that we need in our navies, but of course all over the Federal Armed Forces are more. And we'll have to take this step for the next years, and we'll try to compensate this, I don't know. The fact is that we have a limited possibilities to train them, and so we will hopefully help ourselves in the next 4 or 5 years. But this still will come. The best is that during the COVID period we have not lost anyone, so we could really maintain the numbers. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Vice Admiral Hein, what has been the experience in the UK?
So thanks very much. It's pretty straightforward for us in that recruitment's up by about 20%. Our retention is up significantly, with our voluntary outflow rates significantly reduced. That's all due to the economic conditions that COVID has produced. Training, we have not stopped training at all. We have modified the way we do it, and clearly we've had to do some things that are a bit unique in COVID terms, but we deliberately have not stopped training throughout, otherwise that causes you problems in the longer term. Going forward, who knows where the long-term norms will get back to. The answer is probably to the long-term norms, the clues in the title. But it will depend largely on the economy. So we'll see, we'll watch that very carefully. We're just, as an interest, we're just starting to see the number of people choosing to leave the Navy going up ever so slightly as it looks like the economy starts to pick up. So perhaps we've had that sort of 2-year period of lots of people being quite stable because the economic conditions were uncertain. As that, I suspect we'll go back to prehistoric norms.
Thank you, sir. Let me now go back to Vice Admiral Wang. You will have the final word, sir, on the 2 questions addressed to you. You can answer both or the one that you prefer to answer. Sir, the floor is yours.
谢谢主持人。
Thank you, moderator.
我想就刚才主持人提到的援潜救生问题，谈谈我的一些个人的一些看法。
I would like to respond to the submarine rescue operations and mechanisms question.
作为一名海军的老兵，我想我与在座的各位海军同仁一样，都不愿意遇到海上援潜救生的问题。
As an old sailor, I think the same as other naval colleagues, and I think all of us do not want to face.
潜艇一旦在海上出事儿，将是灾难性的。
It will be devastating once the submarine wreckage occurred at sea.
对于世界各国海军来讲，远潜救生都是一个这个难题，特别是深海的远潜救生，仍然还是一个几乎没有解的、没有答案的难题。
I think for all navies, the submarine rescue operations is so challenging, and especially for those deep sea submarine rescue, I think it is almost unresolved till now.
从近些年世界有关国家海军潜艇失事之后的远潜救生经验来看，远潜救生的成效也十分有。
That in the recent years' experience in submarine rescue operations, I may say the effect is limited.
从实践也可以证明，远潜救生必须要走国际合作，这条道路，因为只有国际合作，才能够这个提高救援时效性、有效性。
And I think that the practice proves that it is necessary and for the world navies to cooperate in submarine rescue operations, because this kind of operations is so demanding in the timeliness as well as effectiveness.
中国海军长期以来致力于不断提升海上这个潜艇救援以及人道主义救援的建设，从海军装备以及部队训练等多个方面持续用力，取得了一定成绩。
And I think for the Chinese PLA Navy, actually, we has always been committed to improving its capabilities in those submarine rescue operations, as well as humanitarian assistance at sea. We improved our capabilities both from the perspectives such as the equipment, capability building, as well as the training.
中国海军同时也愿意与世界海军同行就远潜救生以及海上人道主义救援等问题进行深入的合作和交流。
And the Chinese PLA Navy is willing to cooperate with its foreign counterparts in exchanging ideas in the submarine rescue operation as well as humanitarian assistance.
我们愿意就海上远潜救生以及人道主义救援等演练课题，与各国海军进行双边以及多边范围内的这个联合演练，进行这个更加深入探讨。
We would like to have deeper discussions on the subjects of the bilateral and the multilateral submarine rescue operations.
这次我愿意祝愿我们各国海军的潜艇永远都是安全的，也希望各国海军在远潜救生和海上人道主义救援方面，这个合作能够取得更加深入、广泛、持久、有力的成果。
And also, I would like to extend my best wishes for the safety and security of all the submarines actually sailing at sea. We hope all submarines will be safe. And also, I hope that our cooperation, the submarine rescue operations, as well as humanitarian assistance, will be expensive and long-lasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I trust you all agree that we could have gone on for a little bit longer because this has really been a wonderful discussion and sharing of experiences from various national perspectives. But sadly, the time has come for us to conclude and to end this first session. I would like to thank all of our panelists for their presentations, but also for answering your questions so generously. Also, of course, still special thanks also to Admiral Singh for sending us his pre-recorded video. So that brings us to the end of the first session, and enjoy the break, and we all look forward to the discussion in the second panel. Thank you very much.